Your only job is to ride harder, cowboy. That's what he said to me, a shaking rancher's daughter, in the cold dust of our failing barn. The horse beneath me was pure fury wrapped in hide and muscle, a storm of hooves and teeth named Diablo. I was 3 seconds, maybe less, from being thrown into the dirt, from failing everything and everyone I'd ever known. Then Garrett Wade's voice cut through my panic like a bullet through glass. Your only job is to ride harder. Not softer, not easier, harder. The command made no sense. It was like telling a drowning man to swallow more water. But then the images flashed through my mind, hot and sharp. The foreclosure notice nailed to our front door. The shame in my father's eyes. The truth I'd been hiding from everyone in Silver Bend, Montana. I had exactly 29 days to save our ranch. 29 days to win the territory's richest horse race, the Thunder Ridge Derby. And I'd never stayed on a wild mount for more than 15 seconds in my entire life. The Montana Territory stretched cold and unforgiving that March morning in 1884. The wind howled through the gaps in the barn walls like it had a personal grudge against warmth, against hope, against me. I tightened my grip on the reins, my knuckles white. I could feel Diablo's muscles bunching beneath my thighs, a coiled spring of raw power preparing for another violent buck. Sweat slicked my palms, even as the frost on my breath hung in the air like a ghost. This ranch was my whole world. I'd grown up in the shadow of these mountains, watched my father, Thomas Thornton, build it from nothing but grit and a dream. I'd watched my mother tend chickens and churn butter until her hands were raw, her spirit woven into the very soil. I could shoot a hawk out of the sky at 100 yards, mend a fence in a blizzard, and calculate profit margins faster than most men could spit tobacco. But riding, really riding, the kind that won races and prize money, that had always been my brother's domain. Daniel's. Before the influenza took him 2 winters back, leaving a hole in our family that the wind just kept blowing through. I said harder, Garrett Wade repeated. He moved into my peripheral vision. All 6 feet of lean cowboy muscle and an infuriating confidence that seemed to mock my terror. He'd arrived in Silver Bend 3 weeks ago, a drifter with a reputation for taming unbreakable horses and a past nobody dared ask about. His dark hair needed cutting, his jaw needed shaving, and his gray eyes, they saw too damn much. You're thinking instead of feeling, he said, his voice low and steady. That's your problem. My problem, I ground out through clenched teeth, my body straining against the horse's power, is that this animal wants me dead. Nah, Garrett said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He just wants to know who's boss. His hand came to rest on Diablo's neck, and the animal's ears, which had been pinned back in anger, swiveled forward. The horse didn't calm, not exactly, but he listened. Right now, Garrett continued, his eyes locked on mine, you're asking permission. A horse like this doesn't respect that. You gotta take what you need. The words hit me different than he probably meant them. Taking what I needed. That was the story of the last 6 months of my life. Taking over the ranch ledgers when my father's grief drowned itself in a whiskey bottle. Taking the blame when creditors came knocking, their faces hard and unforgiving. Taking this desperate, half-formed plan to enter the Thunder Ridge Derby, a fool's hope against a mountain of debt. I hadn't planned on hiring help. Couldn't afford it, frankly. But then Garrett Wade had appeared in the Silver Bend General Store, asking about work, and Mrs. Henderson, with a heart of gold and a mouth that never stopped, had mentioned my situation loud enough for half the town to hear. The shame of it still burned like a brand. I can pay in meals and a space in the bunk room, I'd told him outside the store, hating the sound of the charity in my own voice. Maybe a small wage, after the race, if I place. He'd studied me with those unsettling gray eyes, taking in my worn dress and the desperation I was trying so hard to hide. Then he nodded, once, Meals and space work fine, but I got a condition. My spine had straightened instantly. What kind of condition? You do exactly what I say when it comes to the horses, he'd said, his voice leaving no room for argument. No questions, no hesitation. You want to win that race, Clara? You follow my lead. Pride had warred with desperation. Desperation won. It usually did these days. Now, 3 weeks into a training regimen that felt more like a slow-motion execution, I was starting to understand what I'd agreed to. Garrett Wade didn't just teach riding. He demanded a complete and total surrender to the animal beneath you, a kind of trust I'd forgotten how to give to anyone, let alone a half-wild beast. Again, he said, stepping back from the horse. And this time, when he tries to throw you, you drive your heels down and you push forward. You lean into the fight, not away from it. Before I could overthink it, before the fear could sink its teeth back into me, Diablo exploded. It wasn't a buck, it was a detonation of muscle and will. But this time, something new took over. My body reacted on pure instinct, a muscle memory forged from weeks of bruises and bone-jarring mornings. When the violent, twisting buck came, I did exactly what Garrett said. I drove my heels down, I pushed my weight forward, I refused to yield an inch. I rode harder, and just like that, the war ended. The horse settled. Diablo's stride smoothed into a powerful, controlled canter, his energy now flowing with me instead of against me. My breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline singing through my veins like electricity. I was riding. I was really riding. There she is! Garrett's voice carried a note of approval that made something warm and unfamiliar unfurl in my chest. That's the rider who's going to win this race. I brought the horse to a halt, my legs shaking so badly I was surprised I could still sit upright. Garrett moved to help me dismount, his hands closing around my waist, steady and strong. For one dangerous, heart-stopping moment, I let myself notice the things I'd been so carefully ignoring for the past 3 weeks. The way his fingers spanned my ribcage, the faint smell of leather and pine soap that clung to him, the sheer heat of his body cutting through the morning cold. "You're getting there," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble against my ear. He didn't step back as fast as he should have. "But you're still holding something back. I'm giving you everything I've got." The words came out more defensive than I meant, sharp and brittle. His eyes searched mine, and I felt stripped bare, like he could see every crack in my armor. "You're giving me everything you think is safe to give. That won't be enough. Not for this race. Not for a horse like him. He can feel it when you doubt." I pulled away, turning to busy myself with Diablo's tack, needing something to do with my trembling hands. "I'm not some scared girl, Garrett. I know what's at stake." "That's exactly why you're scared," he said, his voice unyielding. He leaned against the barn wall, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "You're carrying weight that's not yours to carry. Your father's debts, your brother's death, this whole damn ranch. You think if you're not perfect, if you don't control every little thing, it'll all fall apart." The accuracy of it stole my breath. It was like he'd reached inside me and pulled out my deepest, darkest fear. I yanked the saddle cinch tighter than necessary, the leather groaning in protest. "You don't know anything about me. I know about loss." His voice went rough, scarred. "I know about trying to hold together something that's already breaking into a million pieces. And I know that pretending you're not terrified just makes the fear heavier." I finally turned to face him, my anger a flimsy shield for the raw vulnerability he'd exposed. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just fall apart? We're 29 days from losing everything in case you forgot." "No," he said, pushing off the wall and closing the small distance between us. The air grew thick, heavy. "You're supposed to trust that you're not doing this alone." His gaze was intense, unwavering. "That's what you're really fighting out there, Clara. It's not the horse. It's the belief that you've got to handle everything, every single burden, by yourself." The intimacy of the moment pressed in on me, making it hard to breathe. Outside, the morning light was breaking gold and rose across the jagged peaks of the mountains. But inside this dusty barn, Garrett Wade was looking at me like he saw past every wall I'd ever built, right into the broken-down heart of me. "Why do you care?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, a whisper of sound. About the ranch? About the race? He took another step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "About you?" He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because you remind me of someone I used to be, before I learned that being strong doesn't mean being alone." Before I could process that, before I could even begin to ask what he meant, the barn door crashed open with a deafening bang. My father stumbled in. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes disheveled. The stale, sour smell of whiskey filled the air. "What in the hell is this?" he roared, his voice thick with fury and booze. My stomach plummeted to the floor. Thomas Thornton had been a good man once, a strong man, a proud man, but grief and alcohol had carved him into something else, something bitter and broken. "Training," I said, my voice dangerously even as I stepped away from Garrett, putting a chasm of space between us. "For the race?" my father sneered, his gaze landing on Garrett with pure contempt. "With him." He spat the word out like it was poison. "I heard about you in town, Wade. Heard you got a past you don't talk about. Heard you got a kid somewhere, a wife you couldn't protect. Heard you ran when things got hard." Garrett's expression went utterly blank, a mask of careful neutrality falling over his features. But I saw the flicker of pain in his eyes before it vanished. "You heard half the story, Thornton." "I heard enough." My father swayed on his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Garrett. "You're not welcome here. Get out. My daughter doesn't need charity from a coward." "Papa, stop it!" I moved between them, shame and a white-hot anger tangling in my throat. "He's helping us. Without him, we don't have a chance." "Without him, we'd handle our own problems," my father roared back, his eyes finally finding mine. They held a pain so deep, it cut me worse than any of his words. "Like we always have. Like a Thornton should." The weight of his disappointment, that familiar suffocating burden, pressed down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend Garrett, to explain everything. But Garrett spoke first. His voice was quiet, devoid of all emotion. "I'll be gone by noon." He looked at me then, just for a second, and the look in his eyes made my chest ache with a loss I didn't even understand yet. "You've got the skills now, Clara. Trust them." Then he walked past my father, past me, and out into the cold Montana morning. He didn't look back. He just walked away, leaving me standing in a barn that suddenly felt enormous and empty, the silence ringing in my ears. I didn't go after him. I couldn't. Not then. My duty was here, with the broken man who was my father. I helped him stumble back to the house, his arm heavy over my shoulders. I made coffee I knew he wouldn't drink, and I listened to him rage about pride, about strangers, about Daniel, about everything we'd lost. Each word was another stone on the wall he was building between us. By the time I finally escaped back to the barn, the sun was high and unforgiving. Garrett's few possessions were gone from the small bunk room. The worn-out bedroll, the spare shirt, the sharpening stone. It was like he'd never been there at all. But Diablo was still there. He was standing calm and patient in his stall, and when he saw me, he nickered softly. I saddled him alone, my hands moving with a mechanical precision I didn't feel. This time, when I mounted, there was no fight. The horse responded just like Garrett had promised he would, like we were partners, not adversaries. It was a miracle. I rode for hours, pushing harder than I ever had before. I pushed Diablo across the frost-covered pastures, feeling his animal strength become an extension of my own will. I rode until my lungs burned and my legs were numb, until the grief and anger had been pounded out of me by the rhythm of his hooves. The training hadn't stopped. Everything Garrett had taught me lived in my muscles now, in my instincts. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like the loneliest thing in the world. That night, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Henderson from the general store, a covered basket looped over her arm and a look of determined sympathy on her face. "Heard your trainer left," she said, bustling past me into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. Shame that. He seemed a decent enough fella for a drifter. "Papa didn't want Charity," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I began unpacking her basket. Fresh bread, a jar of jam, a slab of bacon, focusing on the simple task to keep my hands from shaking. "Charity?" Mrs. Henderson snorted, a sound like a startled hen. She planted her hands on her ample hips and fixed me with a look that could peel paint. "Clara Thornton? That man was working sunrise to sunset for nothing but beans and a drafty cot. That's not Charity, girl. That's something else entirely." The jar of preserves in my hand felt suddenly heavy. "Something else? What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "that he turned down 3 paying jobs right here in town to keep working for you. For free." The world tilted on its axis. "What? That's right," she nodded, her eyes gleaming with the importance of her news. "Including a full-time position from the Prescott Ranch. Good pay, a proper cabin to live in. Would have set him up nice. He told old man Prescott he'd already made a commitment he intended to keep." The words hit me like a physical blow. A commitment. I had assumed Garrett stayed because he had nowhere else to go, because our meager offer was better than nothing. The possibility that he had chosen to stay, chosen to help me, made everything shift sideways. He hadn't been trapped. He had been dedicated. Where did he go?" The question came out as a breathless rush. "Rented a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Henderson said. Then she reached out and caught my arm as I instinctively turned toward the door. "But Clara, listen to me. Your papa, he wasn't entirely wrong about Wade having a past. He does." I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. "He does have a daughter," she said softly, her gossipy tone gone, replaced by something gentler. "Her name is Emma. She's about 10 years old. His wife, she died in childbirth out in Wyoming a few years back. A daughter, a dead wife." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Garrett's haunted eyes, his understanding of loss, his patience with my father's grief, his relentless insistence on not facing things alone. "He's been drifting since," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice filled with a sad kindness. "Working odd jobs on ranches, trying to save up enough money to send for the girl. She's been living with his sister back in Cheyenne." The weight of it all crushed me. He was carrying a burden 1,000 times heavier than my own, and he had never said a word. He had listened to my fears, absorbed my anger, and patiently taught me to be strong, all while his own heart was breaking in silence. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered, the words barely audible. "Maybe he was going to," she squeezed my shoulder. "Maybe he figured you had enough weight on your own shoulders without having to carry his, too. Or maybe, Clara," she added, her eyes full of a wisdom I was only just beginning to understand. "Maybe he was just waiting for you to ask." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the moon painting silver stripes across the floorboards. I thought about trust and fear. I thought about the walls we build to protect ourselves, walls so high and so thick they end up keeping out the very things that could save us. I thought about a man who'd seen me struggling, drowning in debt and grief, and had chosen to stay anyway. A man who asked for nothing but my effort in return, while he was fighting his own silent war. By the time the first pale light of dawn touched the sky, I had made my decision. The boarding house on 3rd Street was shabby but clean, smelling of boiled cabbage and lye soap. I knocked on the door to room number 4 with my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When Garrett opened it, surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by that careful, guarded neutrality. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. "Clara," he said, his voice flat. "You have a daughter," I said, the words tumbling out before I could lose my nerve. "Her name is Emma, and you've been turning down paying work, good work, to train me for free." He leaned against the doorframe, not bothering to deny it. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Mrs. Henderson talks too much." "Not enough, apparently," I shot back, holding his gaze. "You stood in my barn and lectured me about trust, about not doing things alone. All the while, you're out here carrying the weight of the world by yourself in complete silence." "That's different," he said, his voice low and rough. "How?" I stepped closer, my fear and frustration and a terrifying new hope all churning inside me. "How is you running from connection any different than me refusing to accept help? You said being strong doesn't mean being alone. Does that rule only apply to me?" Garrett finally looked away, his jaw tight as stone. "I've got nothing to offer you, Clara. I'm a drifter with a kid I can barely afford to feed, much less bring out here to this life. Getting involved with your situation, with you, that's just setting everyone up for disappointment." "Liar," the word came out sharp, like the crack of a whip. "You're not worried about disappointing me. You're scared, just like I was. You lost someone you loved, and now you're protecting yourself by staying untethered, by never putting down roots. But that's not living, Garrett. That's just surviving." "Sometimes surviving is all there is," he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. "Not for me," I said, my voice softening. "Not anymore. You taught me that." I took a deep breath, pushing past every instinct that was screaming at me to retreat, to run back to the safety of my own misery. "I need you to come back to the ranch, and not just for the training, though God knows I still need that too. I need you back because when you're there, I'm braver. I try harder. I trust more." My voice dropped to a whisper. "And maybe you need that too. Someone to remind you that there's more to life than just running." The silence in the narrow hallway stretched between us, charged and fragile and full of unspoken things. I could hear the ticking of a clock from somewhere down the hall, the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. When Garrett finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. "Your father—" "I'll handle my father," I said, my newfound certainty ringing in the small space. "He's a hurting man, and he's wrong, and he is going to hear me this time. I won't let his bitterness poison what's left of this family." I met his eyes, my gaze unflinching. "But I need to know. Do you want to come back? Not for the job, not as charity, for this, for us, for whatever this is we could be if we were brave enough to try." Garrett moved before I even finished speaking. His hand came up, not to push me away, but to cup my face, his calloused thumb stroking my cheek with a gentleness that made my breath catch in my throat. "I never wanted to leave," he breathed, his voice raw with confession. "I wanted to stay from the first moment I saw you, standing there in the general store, trying to look tough while the whole world was crashing down around you, watching you fight for everything you love with nothing but sheer grit and stubborn determination." He shook his head slowly, his eyes searching mine. "You're not broken, Clara. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You're everything I forgot to believe in." And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was a kiss of desperation and certainty, a promise and a question all at once. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving and had just found a feast. I kissed him back, my hands fisting in the rough fabric of his shirt, clinging to him like a lifeline. In that moment, I felt like I'd been waiting my whole life to surrender, to finally let go. When we broke apart, both of us breathless and shaken. Garrett pressed his forehead to mine. "I want to bring Emma here," he whispered, the words a fragile dream spoken into the space between us. "If we can win this, if we can save the ranch, I want her to grow up somewhere steady, with family, a real family." "Then we'll manage it," I said, my voice filled with the same unshakable certainty I'd learned from him on horseback. "Together." We rode back to the ranch together that morning, the Montana sky a brilliant, hopeful blue above us. I knew the conversation with my father wouldn't be easy, and I was right, it wasn't. Thomas Thornton raged and argued. He threw his grief and his pride at me like stones, using words meant to wound, to make me small again. But I stood my ground. The scared girl he was used to shouting down was gone. "You taught me to be strong, Papa," I said, my voice calm and clear over his yelling. "You taught me to fight for what matters. Well, this matters. Garrett stays, he trains me, and after the race we figure out the rest. This is my decision." My father stared at me for a long, silent moment, and in his eyes I saw the exact second that he finally recognized it. He wasn't looking at his little girl anymore. He was looking at a woman who had grown past the need for his permission. The anger drained out of his face, leaving only a deep, weary exhaustion in its place. "You really think you can win this thing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I know I can," I said, "but only if I stop pretending I have to do it all alone." Something shifted in my father's expression then, a flicker of the man he used to be. "Your mother," he said, his voice thick. "She used to say the same thing to me." He stopped, clearing his throat, unable to continue. I forgot how to listen. "Then start listening now," I said gently, stepping forward and taking his hand. It felt frail in mine. "We're not beat yet, Papa, and we're not doing this alone anymore." The final weeks leading up to the Thunder Ridge Derby passed in a blur of intense training, quiet planning, and stolen moments that felt like we were building the foundation of a new life, plank by plank. Garrett moved back into the bunk room, but now there were evenings where he'd join me on the porch swing, our hands finding each other in the darkness as the stars came out. We talked for hours. He told me about Emma, how she was bright and curious, with her mother's smile and his own stubborn streak. He spoke of the crushing guilt he carried, the feeling that he'd failed as a husband and was now failing as a father. He confessed his deepest fear was that he would never be able to give his daughter the life she deserved. In return, I told him about Daniel, about the vibrant life he'd lived and the gaping hole his death had left. I talked about watching our father crumble under the weight of his grief and the lonely burden of being the last one standing. I told him how I'd forgotten that strength could look like vulnerability and that asking for help wasn't weakness, but a different kind of courage. We were two broken people, finding the missing pieces of ourselves in each other. The telegram came 3 days before the race. It was delivered by a boy on a sweating pony, a small yellow envelope that held our entire future. Garrett's hands trembled as he opened it. The message was short, the words spaced out by the telegraph operator. "Emma arrives Monday. Stop. Aunt Sarah says Montana is perfect. Stop. Can't wait. Stop. Monday, the day after the race." Garrett stared at the paper as if it might burn a hole right through his hand. "I don't have the money for the ticket," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "Or for clothes, or anything." "We'll figure it out," I said firmly, placing my hand over his. "After I win this race, we'll have more than enough to get by. And if we need more, we'll find work. Both of us. That's what a partnership means, right?" He pulled me into a desperate hug, burying his face in my hair. "I don't deserve you, Clara." "Good thing I'm not asking what you deserve," I whispered back, my arms wrapped tightly around him. "I'm only asking what you want." "You," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "This." a life that's more than just moving from one place to the next. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his gray eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. But Clara, if you don't win, then we'll survive anyway, I finished for him, touching his face. Together. A confident smile touched my lips. But I am going to win. You made sure of that. Race day dawned clear and brutally cold. The kind of sharp Montana morning that made your lungs ache and your eyes water just from breathing. The Thunder Ridge track was a chaotic swarm of energy, a sea of spectators, ranchers and miners, townsfolk and gamblers, all betting money they didn't have on horses they believed in. I sat astride Diablo, feeling the animal's controlled power humming beneath me like a living engine. He was calm, focused, ready. So was I. Garrett stood at my stirrup, one hand resting on my knee, grounding me. "Remember," he said quietly, his voice for my ears alone. "Lean into the fear. Don't fight it. Use it. Trust him. Trust yourself." "Trust us," I corrected, and his answering smile was all the courage I needed. It made me feel fearless. The starting gun cracked through the cold air, a sharp report that echoed off the mountains, and the world narrowed to nothing but horse and earth and speed. We exploded from the starting line. I did everything Garrett had taught me. I pushed harder when my instincts screamed to pull back. I trusted when my fear whispered to doubt. I didn't fight the horse's power. I became one with it, moving with him, a seamless union of muscle and will. The other riders, the roar of the crowd, the pounding of hooves on the frozen dirt, it all faded into a blur. There was only the finish line, getting closer and closer, a promise of a new beginning. When Diablo's nose crossed that line, a full length ahead of the next horse, I didn't think about the prize money. I didn't think about saving the ranch or proving my father wrong. I thought about Garrett's face in the crowd, his expression a mixture of pride and profound relief that made my heart feel like it was going to burst. I thought about Emma arriving on Monday, about teaching a little girl with her mother's smile how to be brave and strong. I thought about second chances and found families, and the terrifying, beautiful act of choosing to trust, of falling into a future you had to build yourself. We were married 3 weeks later, in Silver Bend's small, sun-drenched church. My father, sober and steady, stood beside me, his eyes clear for the first time in years. Mrs. Henderson wept openly into a lace handkerchief in the front pew, and Emma, my new daughter, stood proud as a junior bridesmaid in a blue dress I had sewn for her myself. When Garrett slipped the ring on my finger, his mother's ring, a simple gold band he'd carried with him from Wyoming, a symbol of hopes he'd thought were long dead, I felt the last of my walls crumble into dust. "Your only job," he whispered as we stood at the altar, the preacher's words washing over us, "is to ride harder, through the good and the bad. Together." "Together," I agreed, and I kissed my husband while our daughter laughed with delight, and the Montana sun streamed through the stained glass windows, turning everything, absolutely everything, gold. The ranch survived. More than that, it thrived. With Garrett's deep knowledge of horses and my head for numbers and determination, we built something stronger than either of us could have ever managed alone. Emma grew up wild and strong, learning to ride from her father and to fight for what she believed in from her stepmother, surrounded by towering mountains and an even bigger love. She learned the truth that family wasn't just something you were born into, it was something you built, with your own 2 hands and your whole heart. And sometimes on those cold Montana mornings, when the wind howled and the work seemed impossible, I would catch Garrett's eye across the breakfast table. He would smile that slow, steady smile of his, and I would remember that terrified moment in the barn when he told me to ride harder. Not gentler, not easier, to lean into the challenge instead of running away from it. It was still the best advice I'd ever received, about horses, about life, about love, about everything that truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next tale from the untamed frontier. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching.